I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you any of this. I did not sign up to be a hero. I signed up because Earth's diplomatic corps was offering a housing stipend, 3 meals a day, and the chance to see something beyond our solar system before I turned 30. The brochure had stars in it, literal stars, photographed from orbit, glowing like someone had scattered salt across black velvet. I was 26, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Nairobi, with a broken heater and a very loud neighbor, and I thought, yes, that. Whatever that is, I want to go there. What the brochure did not mention was the part where I would spend 18 months as the only human being stationed aboard the Velith Palace, a structure so beautiful it made your chest hurt just to look at it, being treated like a very polite household pet, friendly, tolerated, not quite taken seriously. My name is Marcus Idris Vale. The last name is a coincidence, and the Velith find it either amusing or insulting, depending on their mood and my general usefulness at the time. My title is Cultural Liaison, 2nd grade, which sounds impressive until you learn that 1st grade liaisons get their own offices, and 2nd grade liaisons get a storage closet near the recycling units. For 18 months, that closet was my office. I decorated it with a printed photograph of the Nairobi skyline and a coffee maker I had shipped from Earth at personal expense, because the Velith do not drink coffee and therefore do not provide it, and I had decided very early on that I was not going to give up caffeine just because I was 40 light years from home. The Velith are extraordinary beings. I say that without sarcasm, which is hard for me, because sarcasm is basically a second language at this point. They stand between 7 and 9 feet tall, with exoskeletal plating that shifts color the way a mood ring does, except their color shifts are involuntary and deeply communicative if you know how to read them. They have been spacefaring for 4 centuries. They have treaties with 11 species across 3 star systems. Their architecture makes the great human cathedrals look like something a child built with wooden blocks on a rainy afternoon. They also have absolutely no sense of humor. Not mean-spirited, not deficient in some cruel way. Just genuinely, structurally incapable of understanding why something would be constructed specifically to be non-functional in an absurd way, and why that would make a person feel better. The concept sits outside their framework, the way ultraviolet light sits outside human vision. It is not that they refuse to see it, it is that the equipment for seeing it was never installed. I learned this in my first week, when I attempted to break the ice at a diplomatic reception by saying that the translation device on my wrist kept converting everything into the Velith equivalent of grocery lists, which was not true but which I thought was a funny image. 8 senior officials stared at me. Commander Vrathok, who later became my primary supervisor and also my primary source of professional anxiety, pulled up my file on his data screen and made a note. I later learned the note said, "Liaison Vale exhibits occasional communication errors under social pressure. Recommend patience." The patience, to be fair, went in both directions. I had been there 14 months when I first actually spoke to Princess Saraveth. Not formally. Formally, I had been introduced to her twice, had stood at the correct angle, used the correct honorifics, and managed not to trip over my own feet, which I considered a personal victory. But I mean actually spoke to her, the way 2 people speak when one of them is curious about something and the other one happens to be standing nearby. It was late in what the station's artificial cycle designated as evening. I was walking back from a meeting that could have been a message, carrying my coffee and trying to remember whether I had eaten anything since morning, when she appeared at the end of the corridor, alone, which was unusual, because Velith royalty move in formation the way birds do, never solitary, and she stopped when she saw me. She looked at me for a moment with those large dark eyes, the ones that pick up light the way still water does, and then she said, in careful, considered standard, "I have encountered a phrase in the Earth Cultural Archive that I do not understand. It begins with the words, knock knock." I stood there for a second. Then I said, "Who's there?" She blinked. Is that the correct response? That is exactly the correct response. What followed was the strangest conversation I had in my 14 months on that station. I explained the knock-knock joke structure to her, the setup, the misdirection, the punchline, the specific human pleasure of groaning at something so deliberately terrible it loops back around to being good. She listened the way Velith always listen, which is with their whole body, completely still, Every sense pointed at you like antennae. When I finished, she was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted, because the silence had that particular quality that makes you wonder if you have made a mistake. Then she said, "The humor is located in the space between what is expected and what is delivered." "Exactly," I said. "And humans find this pleasurable. Humans find this necessary," I said, and I was not entirely sure why I chose that word until I heard myself say it and realized it was true. She considered that. Then she said goodnight and walked away, and I stood in the corridor for a moment longer than I needed to, holding my coffee, thinking that something had just happened that I did not quite have the vocabulary for yet. After that, she found me occasionally. Always informally, always in the quiet hours when the palace operated on minimal staff, and there was no one to observe, that the crown princess of the Valeth Compact was standing in a maintenance corridor, asking a human what a pun was, or why people said things were funny when they meant the opposite, or what exactly distinguished a joke from a lie. She was precise in her curiosity, methodical in the way all Valeth are methodical, but underneath the precision, there was something that felt almost like hunger, like someone pressing their hands against a window, trying to understand what was on the other side. I told her about dark comedy, about how humans had spent their entire evolutionary history surrounded by things that could kill them, weather, disease, each other, their own remarkable talent for catastrophic error, and had developed the habit of making jokes about the darkness, because the alternative was to sit in it. About how laughter had this strange biological function of releasing something, letting pressure out of a sealed container before it built up enough to crack. About how the whole species had been, from a certain angle, one long improvised comedy routine performed on a stage that kept catching fire, and the audience had kept laughing anyway because what else do you do? She listened to all of it, and then she said something I have thought about many times since. Your species developed this, in response to conditions that should have produced only fear. That is the part I find remarkable. I did not tell anyone about these conversations, partly because I was not sure they were sanctioned, and partly because they felt like something that would change if I put it under official light, the way certain things only exist clearly when you are not looking directly at them. Then the morning came when the palace went into lockdown. I was in my storage closet office at 6 in the morning, on my second cup of coffee, reading a report about proposed amendments to a trade clause, when every light on the station shifted to the deep amber that indicates emergency protocol, and Commander Vraithawk's voice came through the comm system with the particular tone he reserved for situations that were either very serious or very inconvenient, and which was, in my experience, usually both. Princess Saraveth was missing. The search that followed was one of the most precisely organized and fundamentally misdirected operations I have ever watched from the inside. Vraithawk deployed 40 soldiers, 12 aerial drones, and a psi tracking device that cost more than Earth's last 3 space missions combined. They mapped resonance signatures. They ran biometric scans. They cross-referenced access logs using 3 separate systems that had to be reconciled by hand because they had been designed by different subcontractors, who apparently did not speak to each other. I was questioned for 30 minutes. The implication was quiet, but unmistakable. The last confirmed security footage showed me in the East Corridor, which was near the last location Saraveth had been logged. The math was presented without accusation, just with the particular careful neutrality that means someone has already formed a conclusion and is documenting the steps that led to it. I answered all the questions calmly, and then, when they were done with me, I picked up my coffee and my hand-drawn map of the station, the one I had made in my second week, because the official map had a printing error that placed a load-bearing wall approximately 4 meters to the left of where it actually was, and I went looking on my own. I did not consult the resonance data. I did not cross-reference biometric logs. I thought about Saraveth, specifically, as a person, rather than a missing variable in a search equation. I thought about what she had been looking for in those corridor conversations. I thought about the way she had described the palace once, casually, as a place designed entirely for function and ceremony and nothing in between. I thought about a woman who had been asking about knock-knock jokes in the maintenance corridor at midnight. And then I walked to Hydroponics Bay C, which was a non-essential auxiliary greenhouse section that had been included in the palace's original design and then quietly forgotten about when the plant cultivation program was automated. Nobody went there. It served no tactical purpose. It had no ceremonial significance. It had, however, a window that faced the nebula, at the angle where the light came through in 3 colors, just before the station's artificial dawn cycle, and a row of earth tomato plants that had been growing there since the previous liaison had left them behind, and a low cargo container that was exactly the right height to sit on if you wanted to sit somewhere that no one was going to find you and ask you to be a princess for a while. She was there. She was sitting cross-legged on the cargo container with a data tablet in her hands, and when she looked up at me, there was a half-second of something in her expression that I had never seen on a Valith face before. Something caught. Something close to what humans look like when they are embarrassed, but have not yet decided whether to admit it. Then she straightened slightly and said, with enormous composure, "Knock, knock." I stood in the doorway of the hydroponics bay with 40 soldiers and 12 drones searching the palace behind me, and a diplomatic crisis, technically in progress, and I said, "Who's there?" She delivered the punchline. The timing was perfect. I laughed. The real kind, not the diplomatic kind I had been performing for 18 months. And then she laughed too. And I want to tell you that sound is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was entirely unlike a human laugh. It was like something between a wind chime and a bell struck in a very large, very quiet room. And it was the first time I had ever heard it from her, and possibly the first time anyone in that palace had heard it in a long time. We sat in the hydroponics bay for a few minutes, before I told her we had to go back. She nodded. She had known that, I think. She had just needed a little more time on the cargo container. What happened in the command center when I walked her back in was something I am not going to describe in full, because a significant portion of it was in formal Valith, and went too fast for me to follow, and also because the political mechanics of it are less interesting than what came after. Vrathok was there. The ambassadors were there. Everyone was using the careful, controlled tone that means someone is very angry, but has elected to process it through official channels. Saraveth spoke for several minutes in a formal register I recognized as reserved for policy statements. I caught the word that translates roughly to recalibration. I caught the phrase diplomatic asset. I caught, at the end, a sentence that I asked her to translate for me later, and which she said meant, "The compact has been reading a data point as noise. I am recommending we begin reading it as signal." The agenda for the treaty talks was quietly amended. My clearance level was upgraded. I was given an actual office on the 14th floor with a window, and I moved the photograph of Nairobi, and the coffee maker, and the hand-drawn map, and I sat in it for a while before I started any work, just looking at the nebula through the glass. I sent my incident report to Earth's diplomatic corps that evening. It said the princess had been located. Status nominal. No hostile contact. Situation resolved through standard liaison procedure. It did not say that the resolution had involved a knock-knock joke. It did not say that the most politically significant individual in 3-star systems had taught herself comedic timing from an audio file and deployed it perfectly at 6:30 in the morning during a state emergency. What it also did not say, because I was not sure how to put it in official language, was the thing she told me the following day, standing in my new office, looking at the photograph of Nairobi with that total attention her species brings to everything, when I asked what exactly she had said to the court about me and about humans in general. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I told them that your species has been broken by its history and found ways to laugh about the breaking. I told them that we had classified this incorrectly. We thought it was a weakness." She looked at me. "I told them it is the most alien thing about you, and that we have been standing very close to it for a long time without understanding what we were looking at." I looked out at the nebula for a moment. Then I said, "Does this mean the stipend goes up?" She looked at me. "That was a joke," I said. "I know," she said, and she almost smiled, which for the record is exactly enough.